my interview with convicted spy Christopher Boyce. I first tried to interview Chris back in 2005 when I was researching a story about the Pine Gap spy base here in the Australian desert. Back in the early 70s, a young Christopher Boyce picked up a job working for the defence and intelligence contractor TRW. He worked on a program that Pine Gap was a part of, and through his work there, he claims to have discovered the US government was undermining Australia's democratically elected left-wing government. There's a lot of other evidence from that time to support the general thrust of what he was saying too. More on that next week. But he was disgusted, so he set about wreaking havoc on the US intelligence community by passing off classified documents and ciphers to the KGB in Mexico through his friend Andrew Dalton Lee. Now, they were both caught in 1975, but in 1980, Boyce escaped from Lompoc, robbing 17 banks before he was recaptured around 18 months later. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He was eventually released in 2002 and moved to live the quiet life in the Pacific Northwest with his wife, Kate. Now, back in 2005, I had Kevin Mitnick track Christopher Boyce down using public data sources. Kevin is very good at stuff like that. Now, unfortunately, Chris didn't want to be interviewed back then, but now he has a book out. It's a sequel to the two previous books written about him and Lee, The Falcon and the Snowman and The Flight of the Falcon. It's called The Falcon and the Snowman, American Sons, and it's a really good read if you've read the other books. So, long story short, I finally got my interview, and I'm glad it took me 8 years to make this happen, because in the last 8 years, Wikileaks was born, Manning was arrested, and Snowden started leaking NSA documents. Now, as you'll hear, there's actually some fairly substantial common ground between Boyce, Manning, and Snowden. So I got Chris Boyce on the line and started off by asking him what he thinks of Edward Snowden.
Well, I think that he's done a service to the Bill of Rights. I think he's protecting our freedoms. I'm glad that he did what he did. I think it's too bad that he ended up in the Soviet Union. I think he should have gone where he was going to release that information and stayed there. I don't know where that is, Venezuela or somewhere else, but not to go on an around-the-world jaunt, chase. That distracted from his message. So I regret the fact that he went to Putin's Russia. He should have gone to Venezuela or somewhere else. But I'm glad that he did what he did. And I'm glad that Manning released what he released. And I hope that there are other contractors out there contemplating some similar move. The problem is, from my view, my experience of being slammed down into solitary confinement, like they've done to Manning, is that I think that the federal government is trying to terrorize contractors. I think trying to put fear in their hearts to some of the conditions that they kept Manning for 100 days naked in an isolation cell. Even the trial judge said, well, we can't do this. This is unconstitutional. But what they're trying to do is scare the living crap out of contractors, that we will destroy your life. We will take your brain apart, neural passage by neural passage. But I think that if contractors are going to leak information, they need to go where they are going to have asylum, stay there, and then leak. And then that way the story becomes what they're leaking, not the chase. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's been a lot of reporting about Snowden where, the more relevant thing to be talking about might be what he's leaking. I think that's actually changed. The more recent revelations about the NSA's covert program to sort of undermine public cryptography standards has really, Snowden's got a bottomless briefcase. Every time the NSA... I was at a conference in Vegas in July when General Keith Alexander was there and did a big speech about how harmless and wonderful the NSA were. And then Snowden just kept releasing documents that proved a lot of sort of misdirection in what Alexander was saying. So, I
think you have a good point, and the chase is over. It appears that he's going to stay where he's going to stay. And I'm sure that the Guardian and other persons have copies of everything that he's got. But yeah, it does seem like every time the government opens their mouth, he just releases more
it's amazing.
Compromising information that makes them look like fools.
Chris, if you were 30 years younger, do you think you would have been more like an Edward Snowden than someone who was going to sell stuff to the Russians?
I think the big difference between, for me to answer that question, is that I have a quarter century of experience in the federal prisons. But I almost spent 10 years in solitary confinement, and I just don't think I could ever do that to myself again. I couldn't bring the rage of the government down on my head again. I don't know. Snowden's a braver man than I would be now after having. I couldn't do that again, and I'm sure that there are hundreds and hundreds of other NSA contractors who also are thinking, I just couldn't bring the power of the federal government down on me like that. And I don't. He's a better man than I am at this stage of my life. I suppose I'm a little bit worn out from it all. It's not easy to come out of all those years in prison, but but there's a big difference now. It's so much easier to release stuff, as you were speaking. Back then, even if you went to a New York Times reporter, how would you know? You just wouldn't go to the FBI.
So you think that that's a real concern? Is that the media is? I don't know. I think the media feels the pressure a little bit from the establishment, right? So.
Oh, most definitely.
So do you think that means that there's a role for organizations like Wikileaks?
I think that eventually the United States government will get their hands on him too. I don't think he's going to be elected to the Australian Senate. I think they'll eventually get it. But yeah, I wish there were another 100 outfits like WikiLeaks, and I'm sure there are many people that want to repeat, WikiLeaks.
What their MO?
Yeah, but the problem, as I see it, is that I had always thought that the internet was going to be this thing that opened up the world. I came out of prison and I went, wow, look at this. This was going to be what united people everywhere, which created a free flow of information. But instead, it seems to me that it's become something for the government to monitor and watch us, to collect all our emails and monitor all of our, who we're calling and how long we're speaking to them. I'm kind of shocked by that, by Snowden's revelation. I thought that the internet was going to be something that broke down secrecy, but it appears to me that the NSA and the British are using it for evil purposes, are destroying our civil liberties in the process.
Well, it seems like they've definitely gone a step too far. I think we're at the point now where, most people agree with that. And, you've got this absurd situation where FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, is even, spanking the NSA for violating its orders and sort of the scope of its warrants. And because it's a secret court, nothing really happened to the NSA. So where do you think we go from here with all of it? What would you like to see happen, I guess, is what I'm saying. This is you were one of the first people to take what you say was a moral stance against the overreach of government, just sort of generally when it comes to, intelligence matters. What would you like to see happen? At what point would you be satisfied that things are on track, and right?
Well, I think that I'd like to have a real review, and and then specifically why should the government record all of our emails? And why do they need to keep a record of everyone that we call and how we speak? Things like this are abuses, I think. They need to go. Will they go? I doubt it. Or, in this country, all of our addresses and return addresses and all our packages and letters are photographed now by the post office. Why is that necessary? That just seems to be like overkill. I think everything since 9/11 has been the Patriot Act. All this is all overkill. It's overreach by the surveillance state.
It seems that WikiLeaks, Assange. Assange thought that if he published a whole bunch of information and sort of enlightened the public with these revelations, that things would change. Nothing really has changed since the WikiLeaks dumps. We've got Edward Snowden also, who's releasing all of these secrets. Things might change, but nothing has yet. So to what degree do you think the problem is that the public doesn't have access to enough information about what governments are doing, versus the problem being just general apathy. What do you think's going on here?
Well, I agree with what my wife Kate said here not too long ago, that the average American is more interested in how much, if he has enough cream and sugar in his coffee than his civil liberties. I have to tell you, Patrick, that I'm very pessimistic about. I think that the surveillance state will get stronger and stronger. I'm not optimistic at all that civil liberties are going to be protected. And I think that that's the direction that we're headed. I think that we will become, like President Carter said the other day, that we're not, America's no longer a democracy. I agree with him. I can't really tell you that I'm optimistic that things are going to get better. I think that things are not going to get better. But, and it's legitimate to protect us from foreign terrorists, all right? But why do you have to record everyone's email? It seems to me that the surveillance state spends most of its time spying on the American people themselves. The American people have become, it seems to me, the enemy of the intelligence community bureaucrats, more than foreigners.
Well, I don't know if you caught the news, but it turns out that the NSA has been providing tips to the DEA. So, and instructing DEA agents to concoct alternative sources of the information. So really you've got a government intelligence agency giving tips to other agencies and then instructing them to lie to the courts about the source of their information. I mean, to me, that was probably the second most staggering revelation, the first being the telephone call, duration, origin, destination data that you're speaking about. I mean, are you familiar with that news about the DEA?
No, that's the first I've heard of that. What shocked me was the fact that the NSA is forcing the communications and internet companies and the security companies to leave these back doors into their security systems, so that we really don't have any privacy whatsoever. But that type of the good thing you can say about Snowden, though, is that now this has all come to light and people are talking about it. Will anything be done? I don't know. Will Congress do anything about it? I doubt it. But at least there's a discussion, and at least this allows Google and the other internet companies to push back, to fight this intrusion into the internet, but you can tell this from talking to me, Patrick. I'm not a technical person. I'm 60 years old, and I lost 25 years of my life.
Well, and those 25
developed.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. So those 25 years is when all of this happened, right? But I mean, as much as you say you're technically illiterate, I mean, information is information, whether it's written on a piece of paper or stored in ones and zeros, right? So all that I see that's changed is that we've taken information and made it infinitely and instantly replicable, which is why we've wound up with things like Wikileaks, right. Which is why we've wound up with these, people just taking huge caches of documents out of places. The idea of using a camera to smuggle out a few documents these days is just completely foreign, right?
Yeah, I mean, I used to smuggle out secret documents hidden in potted plants. I mean, if Snowden had to do that, he would have been at it for a million years, especially Manning. Yeah.
I wanted to ask too, I mean, we've got some leakers like Chelsea Manning, we've got leakers like Edward Snowden, who it seems that all, if I put you guys in the same category, there's three of you who had ideological motivations to actually take classified information and push it out into the public domain, except in your case, you took this information and gave it to the Russians. But really, I'm wondering how it is that you can morally justify the decision to actually hand over those things to an enemy of the US at that time.
Well, I actually myself did not sell them. My co-defendant did. And I had never really intended that is how it should play out. But to be honest with you, Patrick, I think that mainly I was just so fed up with the American intelligence community that I wanted to damage them. And I just went off on a one-man war against the intelligence community. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's basically what I was doing.
Now, that's really interesting that you say that, because when I look at someone like Edward Snowden, when I look at someone like Bradley Manning, I actually wonder how much they are in a separate category, which is that they want to reveal information publicly that that they feel should be in the public domain. But when I look at a guy like Bradley, a girl these days called Chelsea Manning, and I look at what she did and how she arrived at that decision, it really seemed like she was very angry at the system as well. So to what degree do you think your motivations and the motivations of someone like Chelsea Manning are actually the same? Because it seems strikingly similar.
Well, I grew up in a very conservative household. My father was an FBI agent. I was steeped in history. I went to parochial schools. I had an utterly conservative upbringing. But as I grew up, I watched the Vietnam War unfolding. I watched the assassinations. I watched all of the racial riots. I watched the impeachment of President Nixon. And it just seemed to me that step by step by step, the federal government was becoming worse and worse. And I had really no experience growing up as a young man in the national government becoming anything but more and more, in my eyes, evil, to the point where I just utterly rejected the whole thing. And if I could, I wrote in another article before that I was tilting at windmills probably also. I was looking for a big enemy to fight. I don't know what's in my personality that caused me to want to do that, but I wanted big, powerful enemy to joust.
Do you perhaps see that there's a bit of common ground there with Manning?
I would think so. I think that, but I also think that Manning was utterly repulsed by all of the content of much of what he was revealing. Honestly, Patrick, I just feel sorry for the guy. I feel sorry for Snowden because I eventually think they'll get their hands on him. And I think that the Department of Justice is going to turn their lives into living nightmares.
So you think Snowden will be more likely to be bussed around into all of these different, places and tried and sort of put through the federal system? You're not expecting a bunch of guys with black helicopters to come and shoot him?
I don't think that he'll stay in Russia forever, and I think that eventually he will move on. And I think that eventually they'll get him. They'll never stop trying to get their hands on him. And when they do, they'll make an example out of him. But it's my fervent hope that among those 100,000s of contractors, that there are others like him who have the same views and who are just as appalled as he is, and who are willing to put their lives on the line to protect civil liberties. And if we have any hope, that's where it lies.